Hello there, my name is Scott Taylor and today I'll be reading the book Kissing the Coronavirus by author M.J. Edwards, released in April 2020 through the publisher Viral Erotica. Kissing the Coronavirus. She was supposed to cure the coronavirus. Instead, she fell in love with it. Dr. Alexa Ashington Ford stared at the test tube between her fingers, her perfectly pink manicured nails clashing with the pale bubbling liquid inside. She recognised the power she had in her grip, the virus which had claimed so many lives and which made her heart beat furiously, like a wild tiger thrashing in its cage. The coronavirus. Despite the devastation the virus was causing across the globe, Alexa felt a rush of excitement every time she picked up the corona sample. Like a pulsating erect penis, desperate to unleash its devastation on anyone who touched it. It had been so long since Alexa had been with a man that the virus was the only thing she could get near to which gave her any sort of thrill. The tickle in her knickers when she worked with the sample was the only sexual release she had experienced since the virus had unleashed hell and taken its hold on the world. And now, she held it in her hand, gripped it tight. She bit her lip. Imagine what she could do with it. She rubbed her hand over her breast, her nipple hardening like a tic-tac. Imagine how she would feel if she touched herself with it. Pretty great, Alexa thought. Pretty great indeedly. Alexa lowered the test tube and unbuttoned the bottom two poppers on her lab coat. Pop, pop. She took the test tube and shook it. The bubbling, creamy liquid sloshed against the inside of the tube. It fizzed up, and Alexa swore she could feel the glass expanding, swelling up and down as she shook the tube. A shock of electricity coursed through her veins, eventually stopping as it reached her vagina. It was like she'd sat on a battery, everything tingled, and it felt good. But Alexa knew it could feel better, much better. Alexa pulled down her lab pants and pulled her panties to the side, her pussy so wet that the lace glided across her skin like a fat man on a water slide. She lowered the test tube. As the COVID-19 sample got closer to her, she felt the rush. An intense burst from within, like an entire fireworks display going off at once. She twisted the test tube in her grip, ready to push it inside. She'd done this with so many men who didn't know how to control their own flailing cocks, like they'd had minds of their own and required guidance. Alexa tightened her grip on the tube. She imagined it had veins pumping blood to keep it hard for her. She thought about the power. She touched the test tube to her wet lips. Dr. Ashington Ford, would you mind cataloguing these new test samples? Shit. Alexa hadn't realised that her boss, Dr. Gertley Chund, had walked back into the lab. Thankfully, her back had been to the door, or else Dr. Gertley Chund would have seen everything. And that kind of gave Alexa a little rush too. Not that she liked Dr. Gertley Chund, he wasn't the sort of guy she usually went after. She liked big, muscular men who looked like Greek statues, except with huge cocks rather than small ones. Dr. Gertley Chum was small and had a funny moustache, but after having been stuck in a lab with him for so long, so deprived of the feeling of a hot man-dog inside her lubricated pussy bun, she had even considered asking him if he'd be interested in a quick bit of sex to help her get over her infatuation, so she can get on with searching for a cure. Because that's what they were there for. Not for lust-induced sessions with the cause of the pandemic. They were there for the cure, and they were determined never to leave the lab until it had been found. However, Alexa still held a grudge against Dr. Gertley Chund. She still thought about hate-fucking him. Sure, but her pride was more important than a bit of slap and tickle. She knew the vaccine they were waiting to trial on human patients needed a little more COVID-19 in order for the body to properly build up the necessary antibodies. But would Dr. Gertley Chund listen? No, he would not. When the coronavirus had first taken hold of the people of Wuhan, Dr. Gertley Chund, one of Ohio's top biochemical neuroviral epidemiologists, had asked a core team of doctors to lead a task force to find the cure. There had been 4 of them at the start: Dr. Gertley Chund, Dr. Ashton Ford, Dr. J and Dr. Wobble. Then, slowly the virus had spread across the globe. Asia, Europe, some other places, but most importantly and worryingly, America. Then, even more slowly, the virus began to infect the lab. First to succumb was Dr. J, then Dr. Wobble. That was it. And so Dr. Gertley Chund became more determined, so determined in fact, that he had stopped listening to reason, and because Alexa had huge boobies, a thick ass and nice legs, he would sometimes overlook her. Alexa admired him so much, but lately his attitude had gotten in the way of her fantasies. He was definitely Marge material, but he just wasn't what she wanted appearance-wise. She couldn't get over that moustache. She loved beards. And a moustache was only the start of a beard, like micropenises, or just the start of a real penis. You need the rest of it for it to truly be meaningful. And now, with his new bad attitude... "Dr. Ashendeford, did you hear me?" said Dr. Gertlie Chunt. "You've been standing there not responding to me for 3.5 minutes. Alexa placed the sample back on her workbench and calmly refastened the buttons on her lab coat. Pop. Pop. "Yes, I heard you, Dr. Gertlie Chunt," said Alexa, turning to face him. "I've told you, call me Bob," he said. "We practically spend all day and night here, we may as well be friendly." "Yes, Dr. Bob." He smiled, and his moustache curled upward, accentuating the beardlessness of his face. If only he had a beard, and was taller, and had a big cock, and was handsome, and made her wet. Like COVID-19. "So if you catalogue these new samples and the data aligns with what we already have, we might just be ready to trial the cure," said Dr. Gertlie Chunt. Alexa nodded. She had been working with Dr. Gertlie Chunt and the others, before they died, on the cure for the virus for weeks, and now, finally, there was a slim chance that they may have found the cure. And Alexa would finally know what it felt like to grasp a cock in her hands again. "I'll do it," she said proudly. Dr. Gertlie Chunt nodded and left. Alexa didn't waste any time. She tore open the box of samples and began running them on the samplometer. Each sample came up positive, and each matched up with results they had previously obtained from other samples they'd sampled. This was great news. But Alexa knew she had to replicate the results against the original sample. Any excuse to hold that powerful beast in her hands once again. She didn't need to be asked twice. Alexa took the creamy, bubbling COVID-19 sample from the workbench, holding it close to her quivering breasts as she returned to the samplometer. She ran the sample and it came out exactly as she had hoped. This was perfect. It meant that they'd be able to run the trials for the cure. Unless... Alexa flounced across the lab, her blonde hair wafting lavishly to Dr. Gertlie Chunt's workstation. She opened the cabinet containing the trial vaccines and took out a test tube containing a bright blue liquid. The cure. She knew there wasn't enough COVID-19, she just knew it. So if the trials were about to begin, she knew what she'd have to do. And she decided, because she knew it, that she'd have to take action. Alexa opened the test tube filled with the trial vaccine. She opened the tube filled with the coronavirus sample. Pop. Alexa stared at it. The creamy liquid bubbled and popped like a fresh bowl of Rice Krispies. Snap. Crackle. Pop. Even the sound of the virus made her ovaries clash together like cymbals. It was so powerful, so strong, so deadly. Which is why it had to be stopped. Slowly, Alexa raised the sample of COVID-19 so the virus neared the edge of the test tube. She only needed to add a drop. She was one of the best scientists around, but so was confident a drop would be all it would take to make the vaccine perfect. Just one drop. Plop. There. Alexa had done it. She replaced the lids on each test tube and returned the vaccine to the cabinet. Dr. Gertlie Chunt would never need to know Alexa had made the changes. They'd run the trial by the medical council, get approval, then in a few months they'd administer the vaccine to test subjects around the country and monitor how they reacted. Once the trials were a success, which of course they would be, they'd use the original vaccine to create more and more and more to use across the world. It would be a waiting game, but Alexa knew it would be worth it. After 30 minutes, Dr. Gertlie Chunt returned to the lab carrying boxes of medical supplies. His face was red and his eyes sunken, like he was desperate for sleep. But they couldn't sleep, they had lives to save. "How were the new samples?" he asked. Alexa couldn't hide her smile. All perfect." Dr. Gertlie Chunt's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Yes." "Well then, we can do it. We can start the trial." Alexa smiled. "Yeah, I'll write the letter to the medical council." "No," said Dr. Gertlie Chunt. "We're skipping approval from the medical council." Alexa's heart fluttered like it had done the time she'd fucked the farmer's cross-eyed son and uncrossed his eyes. What do you mean?" she asked. Dr. Gertlie Chunt dropped the boxes and marched over to the vaccine cabinet. He threw open the door and grabbed the vaccine. The very same vaccine Alexa had added an extra drop of COVID-19 to. "I'll do it," he said. Alexa gasped. "Doctor, no!" "Alexa, please, call me Bob." Alexa gasped. "Bob, no!" "Yes, Alexa," he said sternly. He took a syringe out from his lab pocket and popped off the lid of the test tube. Pop. Then Dr. Gurleychand dipped the needle into the vaccine and drew the blue liquid up into the liquid-holding part of the syringe. "Bob, you can't," said Alexa, grabbing his bicep. It was so small, so weak. "Alexa, I can," he said, "and I will, I have to." "You might die." "Better me than some helpless children." Dr. Gurleychand rolled up the sleeve on his arm. "I had to do this, Alexa. I didn't tell you this before, but I have the coronavirus." Alexa gasped again, then covered her mouth as she realised she and Dr. Gurleychand were not practising social distancing etiquette. "So this is my only option," he said proudly. "Dr. Ashtonford, if the trial doesn't work, it has been an honour working with you." Alexa nodded and stepped back 2 metres. Then Dr. Gurleychand plunged the syringe into his arm, and the blue liquid disappeared into his veins. There was a moment of silence. Alexa had never seen Dr. Gurleychand in this way before, so brave, so selfless. Maybe she had misjudged him. Maybe. He fell to the floor. "Doctor!" exclaimed Alexa with panic-driven fear. "No!" he yelled. "Don't come any closer, I have it under control." For some reason, the lights flashed, wind whipped around the lab, lashing Alexa's hair back and forth and shaking her ample breasts. There was lots of sound and shaking, and Alexa's heart hammered harder than the time she was hammered by the carpet fitter when he came to fit carpets in her country manor. Alexa edged back, pushing back until her back pushed back against the wall. Dr. Gurleychand screamed. He clutched his chest. He crawled around the back of his workspace as the wind whipped up and the lights flashed again. Then, silence. The wind settled, and Alexa's hair fell perfectly against her shoulders. "Dr. Gurleychand," she breathed. "Nothing." Bob." "Who is Bob?" came a voice. Alexa blinked. "Who? What?" "Bob? What do you mean? I know no Bob." A hand clamped down on the workspace. It looked like a normal hand, except it was green. "Dr. Gurleychand, what's happened to your hand?" wailed Alexa. "I don't know who that is," came a bellowing bellow which rattled the beakers and tinkled the tubes around the lab. Alexa stepped away from the wall, her heart ravaging the inside of her chest. She took tiny steps towards Dr. Gurleychand, her breaths short and sharp. A second hand slammed down on the surface, and Alexa squealed. It, too, was green. There was a low groan, almost like a growl, which deepened and became a roar, a guttural, animalistic roar, so strong and powerful it made Alexa's clitoris judder with anticipation. Then, one detail at a time, Dr. Gurleychand stood from behind the workspace to reveal himself. His strong brow, piercing blue eyes, supple lips, a wide jaw like the trunk of a car, bulky, thick shoulders, a flat stomach, a bulge in his trousers the size of a medium-length python, legs, and presumably feet, but Alexa couldn't see those behind the desk. His body had grown so much his lab uniform had torn, his thighs had obliterated his pants, muscle poking out like a cheeky kitten. His pectoral muscles were so large and toned they practically hummed. The tip of his penis winked out above his beltline, and Alexa was positive he wasn't even erect. She couldn't stop staring. And it was green. In fact, all of him was green, and he was covered in small green bumps, which sciencey people like Alexa called spike proteins. Wait, if he had spike proteins protruding from his body, wouldn't that mean he was... No, it couldn't possibly be, no. But it could just be... "Dr. Gurleychand," asked Alexa, "is that you?" He shook his head. "Are you in there, Dr. Gurleychand? Bob?" "No," said the enormous green man. He was at least a metre taller than Dr. Gurleychand had been, and almost twice as wide. "Then who are you?" asked Alexa. "I don't know." "Do you know who you are?" "I think so," he said. "Or should I ask what you are?" He nodded, his bustling neck muscles contorting. Are you the virus?" "Yes," he said. "Your coronavirus, COVID-19? "Yes." "What happened to Dr. Gurleychand?" "I consumed him." "Why?" "The injection, the vaccine trial." "How?" "He had the virus. There were traces of the virus in the vaccine, vast traces. Adding them together created more virus than a man could handle. I'm the result." "So you are COVID-19? "Yes." He had a sad expression. Alexa wasn't sure what she felt. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anguish. It was intrigue, perhaps a little excitement. He stepped forward. "Don't come any closer," exclaimed Alexa, even though she secretly wanted him to get closer. Much closer. "It's fine," he said softly. "I can sense that you're immune." "Immune to the virus?" she asked. To you?" "Yes," he said. "You're asymptomatic. You had the virus without even knowing." "Does that mean that Dr. Gertlichund was infected because of me?" He nodded. A single tear trickled down Alexa's rosy red cheek, and she closed her eyes. This was her fault. Suddenly, a strong chonk of a finger rubbed across Alexa's cheek. The virus had wiped it away for her. He had been strong but soft, assertive yet caring. Alexa's clitoris floundered. She shouldn't be feeling this way. She should be frightened, terrified, but she didn't feel any of that. The virus opened his hand, and Alexa nestled her cheek into it. It was like laying on a warm, welcoming pillow, soft and strong, dreamy and happy. Some other nice things she couldn't even describe. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Gertlichund," she whispered. "He's gone," said the virus. "I'm here now." She nodded and shuffled towards him. He opened up his body, allowing Alexa to be engulfed in his skin and muscles. She felt his convulsing member against her waist. It was so long and warm and fat, like an arm without the bones. She wondered what it would look like when erect. "What's your name?" she asked. "Call me COVID," he said. There was something about being wrapped in his arms. She should have been scared, but instead she felt safe, the safest she'd ever felt. She looked up at him. His eyes were striking, like a goat's, but without the sideways pupils. She couldn't look away, and they seemed to be growing bigger, wider, sexier. But Alexa soon suddenly realised they weren't getting bigger. They were getting closer. So close, she could see the details on his face, the spike proteins lapping away from his skin. His lips so close she could taste them, his tongue so soft and hot, like a chunk of microwaved fish sloshing around inside her mouth. A big hand grabbed at her even bigger breast, clinging on like he was climbing a mountain. COVID tore her lab coat, revealing her perfectly round, perfect breasts. He lowered his neck and chewed away her bra, allowing it to drop to the floor so her breasts were unleashed. They bounced around like water balloons, glistening in the summer sun. She had nice nipples. COVID licked Alexa up and down. Her knees buckled and she fell, but COVID reacted fast and caught her, laying her down softly on the cool tiled floor. But she didn't want him to have all the fun. She snatched at his pants, ripping what remained of them away and releasing his beast of a cock. It swelled like a balloon being filled with helium, rising up, standing to command, begging for her to take it in her hands. She grabbed it and began to stroke it up and down. COVID groaned but didn't stop lapping at Alexa's body. His cock rocked up and down with appreciation, the veins bulging out further than she'd ever seen. She took him deep into her mouth, her throat stretching as he continued to grow. But this only enticed her more as she took more and more of his cock, slobbering all over it and grunting with appreciation. Then he pulled it out and it made a popping sound. Pop. And he spun her over, clamping his hands down in her ass, spreading her cheeks wide so he could thrust his warbling member deep into her pocket of ecstasy. It was like an earthquake had hit the lab. COVID thrust and thrust and thrust, and all Alexa could do was grab hold of the table legs and try not to crack her teeth in the floor as she lay there open-mouthed, gasping, desperate to cry out in pleasure, but not able to make a single sound. Her pussy tightened around COVID's cock, and his grunting made it tighten further. She'd never experienced anything like it, and she came, her entire body spasmed, and she writhed around like a bumble ball with no off switch. A firm hand cracked against her ass, and COVID grunted like a thunderclap. He filled her with love lotion, which oozed out instantly and spread right across the floor. That will, without a doubt, thought Alexa, take a long time to clean up. But Alexa didn't care. She'd just been fucked like she'd never been fucked before. She felt amazing. She felt alive. She felt... What was this feeling? A warmth both inside and out. Bubbly, like cola, ran through her veins. As COVID wrapped her up in his arms like she was the filling in a burrito, she realised that she never wanted to be apart from him. She wanted to spend eternity encased in his warming warmth. Was this love? She'd never felt it before. Lust, absolutely, but love? Never. So was this it? Was it? Was it? She looked up into COVID's eyes and he stared right back. Her heart raced. Sweat poured from her pores. He had undoubtedly taken her breath away. For the rest of the evening, Alexa and COVID remained in their embracing embrace, barely able to take their eyes away from one another. Gone were Alexa's worries. No more did she mourn Dr. Gertley Chund. Missing was her aching to be savaged vaginally. She had listened to her heart and vagina and allowed herself to succumb to COVID's charm. She had ignored what her head had said, the dread, and instead, she had embraced love. She lay still, listened to COVID's heart, and she closed her eyes. And she rested. And rested. And... About the author, M.J. Edwards. During the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, M.J. Edwards turned her hand to writing, combining the two biggest parts of her life at that moment, the virus and sex. She hopes that you enjoy this book. Any similarities to real-life situations are purely coincidental. She lives in Surrey with her husband and 19 ferrets. I have been Scott Taylor, reading Kissing the Coronavirus. Feel free to comment below, like and subscribe, and of course, if you want to see more, let me know, because there is a sequel, Kissing the Coronavirus 2, that we can cover as well. Thanks very much. See you all later.